Okay, the February 18, 2025 work session is now called to order. First up, we have donation of K-9 first aid kit. Mr. Justin Stoner. Right there. Okay.
Yes, there's a microphone here,
Okay. There you go.
and female officers are here as well.
Hi, guys. How are you? So I woke up this morning and my schedule said that I was supposed to donate some K-9 medical kits, and I thought I was supposed to just drop them off and leave. I had no idea I was doing this. But I work for Perry Fence Company. We've been in business for about 50 years. We're out of Fayetteville, Pennsylvania. We do a lot of fencing in Hagerstown. And our corporate sponsor, Dog Watch, does a lot of dog underground fencing. They came out with this thing that they were gonna do, that they would have these medical kits and we would donate them to as many officers as we could. And we had we were asked if we wanted to join or not. We said, yes, we'd love to. Perry Fence really supports our law enforcement. Super nervous, and we appreciate everything you guys do. I've given them out to a bunch of different officers. Got some hugs and handshakes in the parking lots, nothing like this. This isn't live stream, so I'm sure it is. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, guys.
These guys are more handshakers instead of huggers.
Yeah, they look like that. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Do we need more? He wants to get a picture. Does everybody here have a dog? I mean, I can get more if we need more. Thank you. I don't want to take long. He wants to get a picture of you guys. Yeah, please make sure if I get bored, need them.
You did great.
As much as I want.
I did hand out that sheet. If everybody finds that, yes.
All right. All right, next up is our preliminary agenda review. We will have the invocation and the pledge of the flag. Announcements. Rules of procedure effective December 17, 2024. The use of cell phones during meetings is restricted. All correspondence for distribution to elected officials should be provided to the city clerk and should include a copy for the city clerk for inclusion into the official record. Our meeting schedule for March is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025, State of the City at 7 a.m. Tuesday, March 4th is a work session at 4 p.m. Tuesday, March 11th is a work session at 4 p.m. Tuesday, March 18th is a work session at 4 p.m. And Tuesday, March 25th is the regular session at 7 p.m. We will have an appointment of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Is there anything within the
Yeah, we'll have a
proclamation?
couple of proclamations.
Couple proclamations? Okay. We'll have agenda item citizen comments. Citizen comments on the agenda shall be limited to topics listed for consideration on the agenda and limited to 3 minutes. We'll go approve minutes of January 14th, 2025, January 21st, 2025, and January 28th of 2025. We'll move on to our consent agenda. First up would be community engagement, open container exemptions for the 2025 downtown events, bridge repair, minor bridge structure, HAG 12, Brutus and Associates Incorporated, Columbia, Maryland, at $49,730. Armored Car Services, Loomis, Palatine, Indiana at $12,939.48. Fire, personal protection gear replacement, Whitmer Public Safety Group, Coatesville, Pennsylvania, $34,722. And K9 Explosive Detection Dog, NCK9 LLC, Four Oaks, North Carolina, at $18,500. Planning and Code Administration, a 2024 Chevrolet Silverado, Criswell Automotive Fleet Sales, Gaithersburg, Maryland, at $44,039. Police, the license plate reader software. You should have, everybody should have a sheet,
The single sheet.
on that right now. Okay. Public Works, Skyline Technologies Fiber Installation at UD Deck. Skyline Technologies LLC, Glen Burnie, Maryland, $12,718.23. The Hub City Garage Work Change Order, Callis Contractors LLC, $86,311. Landscape Grounds Maintenance Lawn Enforcement LLC, Bunker Hill, West Virginia, $62,181.20. Utilities, under light, HVAC system replacement, HLD Administrative Office, MS Johnson Company, Hagerstown, Maryland, $20,425. Water, underground infrastructure and marketing, FY25 change order, USIC Locating Services LLC, Indianapolis, Indiana, at $75,500. Also underwater, water and wastewater rate model study, New Gen Strategies, Annapolis, Maryland, $50,050. Hack Analyzers Maintenance Agreement Renewal, Hack Loveland, Colorado, $21,448. Polyblend Polymer Pump System for non-ionic polymer, USA Blue Book, Gurnee, Illinois, $10,611.28. Under wastewater, pneumatic actuators for oxygen skid, Jaeger Supply Incorporated, Reading, Pennsylvania, $30,874.60. 2025 Chevrolet Equinox, Hertrick Fleet Services, Milford, Delaware, $29,102. A 2025 Ford F-250 with plow package, Hertrick Fleet Services, Milford, Delaware, $61,497. And a 2025 Ford Ranger at Hertrick Fleet Services, Milford, Delaware, $35,586. There will be no unfinished business items. New business would be introduction of an ordinance, 2024 Land Management Code amendments, introduction of an ordinance amending Chapter 64-8, Section 303 for swimming pools, introduction of an ordinance, Chapter 186, nuisance abandoned vehicles, approval of a resolution, acceptance of stormwater management easement adjacent to Lois Harrison Boulevard, approval of resolution, accepting fee simple dedication of portions of Edgewood Drive and Paul Smith Boulevard and the entirety of Lois Harrison Boulevard, approval of a resolution, accepting fee simple dedication of Peloton Street by Burhan's Village LLC, approval of 3373 union contract, approval of 2024 to 2028 strategic plan, approval to accept award of Coverdale grant, approval to accept award of Edward J. Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant, approval of a donation to the City Police Department Auxiliary Unit, approval of citywide mowing contract 2025, 3/15/25 to 12/15/25, approval of citywide dumpster service contract, approval of flag design for Sister City with Hagerstown, Indiana, approval of recommended consultant for the next 10-year downtown plan, and approval of change to fishing at Pangbourne Park. And of course, we'll have general citizen comments. General citizen comments are welcome and limited to agenda items and limited to 3 minutes. We'll have city administrator comments, mayor and city comments, and then we'll adjourn. There you go. Next up, we have review of the strategic plan. Let Scott and Nice want to take that over, the city
Sure.
administrator.
What you have in your packet is a culmination of your several sessions to create your strategic plan for 2025, 2028. I just ask that you look through them. If there is anything missing, or anything you would like to add, you let me know now or anytime before the approval, next week, would be good.
Should this technically say 2024 for this term? Just asking because of the agenda, the preliminary, we have 2024.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll start in 2024, but yeah.
So we'll get back to you if we have any comments before next week, right?
Yep.
Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you all for doing this. It really helps us as we get through budgets and departmental goals. This helps tremendously. Thank you.
And we'll get the chance to hear departmental goals,
You absolutely will be part of the
March.
budget presentation. Yep.
March, right?
Huh?
Is it March?
Beginning of April.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
good. If they are, we're good.
All right. Hey, next up, is acceptance of streets. Our city engineer, Jim Bender.
Good afternoon. As the mayor was reading through the preliminary agenda, there were a section that you'll consider next week on accepting certain streets into the city system. And since we have a couple fairly new council members, I thought I'd take just a couple minutes and explain what that process is and why we go through it the way we did. So when a developer submits plans for a residential development or a commercial development, and that plan includes public streets or streets that they would like to be public once they're finished, we go through a process. We review those plans and we make sure that they are meeting all of the city's design standards, and they're using our details so that we know that when it's constructed, it will be in accordance with city standards. We issue a road construction permit to the developer, and at the same time, we require them to post a bond or surety. And the amount of that bond is 100% of the construction cost for the street. And the reason that we do that is, if it was let's say a residential development, developer started the process of building the streets, people started to build houses and move in there, and then the developer walked on the project, we would have the ability to pull that bond and actually complete the roadway construction, so that it tries to keep the city out of a situation where something is half finished and we have no funds available to complete it. During construction, our staff and some third-party inspectors are looking at the construction. They're verifying that everything's being done properly. The city does a final inspection of the streets. And at that point, we say, yes, everything appears to be in order. The developer is required to submit what we call as-built drawings of the road, so that if they made any minor changes during construction, it's documented on those plans, so we know what those changes are. And the last step, after the city council formally accepts streets into the city system, the original street construction bond is either released to the developer or it's reduced down to 10% of its value. And we hold that reduced amount of a bond for 1 year. Basically, it's the warranty period for the street, so that if something would start having potholes or sidewalk starts deteriorating, within that 1 year period, we still have those funds that we can go and address it if the developer's unwilling to. So it's really a pretty straightforward process. There are 3 streets, portions of actually 4 streets that we're bringing to council for consideration of accepting next week, and they're in your packets. So if you have any questions, be glad to try to answer them. I just thought it'd be a good idea just to run through the process so you know why we do this. Okay.
Any questions?
I don't.
No?
Hey, Jim, can you, on a similar but different topic, when it comes to annexation, and we annex an area that includes public streets, right? We take ownership of those streets at that time?
No,
Sometimes?
our practice in the past has been, the street, physically, the street may come into city boundaries. You know, as our boundary expands, the street physically might be inside city limits. But our practice has not been to formally take over those streets, unless that's something that the city council would request, and it would have to be in conjunction with Washington County. And we have had conversations at a staff level with county staff about this issue, because there are certain situations where it would make sense in staff's opinion to take those streets in. And a good example is the section of West Oak Ridge Drive where the new warehouse building, there's other development there. The city owns virtually, or doesn't own, but the city limits include just about every property that touches either side of that street. It's the Tech High School, the Antietam Academy, the two properties that are under development right now. There's going to be just a few properties on that street that are still in Washington County. And it just feels to us at the staff level that that's a street that, you know, we're on both sides of it. It would make sense for the city to accept that into. We had preliminary discussions with county staff about that, and we're still, I guess, waiting for some feedback on whether that's something that they would like to entertain or not.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, 2024 Land Management Code text amendments, post-public hearing review and guidance. Mr. Stephen Bachmiller.
Afternoon, everybody. You had your public hearing for the annual package of text amendments. We received no testimony at that time. We did receive comment from one party in the period in which left the record open. That was from Mr. Fred Frederick of Frederick Seibert and Associates. He had some suggestions for making some adjustments to the provision on mixed-use buildings that would allow, that would make adjustments that the minimum amount of open area or open space could also include indoor amenities. I'm not going to read it verbatim to you into the record, but in my cover memo that I provided in your packet, the bottom half of page 1 and the top half address that. Staff has no objection. We did have a little bit of concern with some of the suggested wording. We have some recommended adjusted language on page 2, just to keep it clear and to make sure that that this is a combined indoor-outdoor and not worded in such a way where it would allow all of that 200 square feet to be indoor. There ought to be some outdoor open area if the building is going to be mixed use. So in your packet, you have Mr. Frederick's letter, my memo that outlines that, and then, of course, the content of the packet, which also includes the correction to the camper issue that we discovered just prior to the last hearing, and also the provision for the cannabis type stuff for the indoor plant growing facilities that was removed as previously discussed. So that's not part of this package. So at this point, we're looking for direction from you all on which of these items within this package you want to move forward with, if there's any of them that you want to tweak at all. But you're not obligated to adopt the entire package. You can pick, whichever ones that you want and leave other ones out. So
Here's my primary concern with the inclusion of the consideration for both indoor and outdoor space being considered as part of the required green space. I think it hinges on the assumption on one side of that argument that the intent of providing green space within a community and usable green space is to ensure that as the community grows, the appropriate level of green space is available for the patron, the public in general. The other side of that would be to include some percentage of indoor space, which is typically not viewed the same as green space in terms of being open and available to the public. And I use this example, and my sister will probably kill me if I use, but I'll use it anyway. So she lives in a neighborhood outside of the city, south of the city. There's a pool in that neighborhood with a mixture of what you would generally consider sort of indoor and outdoor use, right? A pool and some green space. And while the neighborhood doesn't have any great concern with the general public utilization of the green space, you know, as part of an HOA, they pay a noticeable amount of funding on an annual basis for the indoor-oriented open space. And so I guess if the percentages, if they're not spelled out, or if the availability of the space for the public in general is not spelled out, I mean, that puts us in a situation, potentially, where residents of a neighborhood call in and say, hey, city, you know, this pool is for our neighborhood. We pay HOA fees to use this pool in this neighborhood, you know, and, you know, now, so the HOA directors, you know, want to sort of sell passes, you know, or allow public from the next neighborhood over to come in. And I don't see why we would put ourselves through that type of inclusion in that type of position. And maybe that's not what we're doing here, but I kind of see if you're going to use that combination of space, you know, you can attach that logic to a gym, to, you know, to let's take, I think Northgate has like a community center, you know what I mean, with a pool, et cetera. And it really isn't intended for the public. It isn't available to the public.
That's correct.
And the purpose of green space within any neighborhood is not for the confines of use and authority of use of that neighborhood, but rather a reflection that as the city grows and neighborhoods around it grow, that it is available. I take this example. There are 450 houses being built across the street from me on Virginia Avenue. There is no park within a reasonable walking distance of that Virginia Avenue neighborhood. Greenberry Hills, Virginia Avenue proper, south of the Big Dipper. So when this neighborhood is built, it would be very odd for me to look at my children who go to school with the other children on the bus and say, hey, I'd really like you to come over and play in this area that's, you know, been delineated for open space by the city and required, but you're not allowed because, you know, you're not part of that neighborhood. And so I think that any direction we go down this path of saying that indoor space can be included as part of that percentage definitely heads down that path of psychologically an exclusionary approach by folks that move into that community. Another case in point is when we built the 3 elementary schools. When I was a county commissioner, we built the one out at Morgansville, we built the one down in Sharpsburg Pike. And I remember going to a hearing with the Board of Ed with about 100 parents, you know, from that neighborhood, you know, just, you know, expounding upon to the Board of Ed, you know, this school was built for our kids in our neighborhood. It's like, no, it's a public school for Washington County meant for the attendance of students of Washington County, that there is no secular, you know, construct to that thought process.
It's actually, what you bring up is actually very timely with these developments going on, such as the one that you mentioned across from your house. The way open space has been administered in the planning process for decades is that it's designed, owned, and maintained by the homeowners association. They're under no obligation to operate a public park on their own private land. So if they want to say this is only for the residents of the subdivision, there's nothing preventing them from doing that. We do have a provision in the subdivision ordinance that says that as these developments come online and they're designed and they have certain open space, the city can accept parts of that open space into the city's public park system where it's maintained, paid for by the taxpayer, available to the taxpayer. In that example, if the development that you're referring to, which is known as Virginia Commons, as we move along through the development process, if the city wants to take ownership of part of that open space and make it a city park, because there are no parks within walking distance, there is a process within our ordinances to allow for that. But we can't expect a homeowners association to foot the bill to operate a public park.
I agree. And I think that that is folly to assume is going to occur with any great degree of certainty over time, because HOA is just, to me, it's a fairly, gamble, of a process to begin with.
Right.
Having a strong HOA that remains, solid in perpetuity, unlike government, which, remains as constant as it does. And so for me, it's real simple. You have X amount of land, we require X% of it to be dedicated for usable green space. If you want to build some private indoor space for the benefit of the neighborhood in which you're building, you carve that off of the space you have available for development of that neighborhood. You may lose 10 houses in that process, but that's your decision as a developer. We shouldn't be accepting a reduction in whatever the agreeable percentage is of green space for public use, you know what I mean, at the detriment of ensuring that development then gets the extra 10 houses, you know what I mean, and forgoes that other amenity they want to provide of their own accord.
Well, keep in mind that this particular provision applies to mixed-use buildings, either new ones that are being built or existing buildings in our commercial zoning districts that somebody wants to retrofit to put apartments into them. It's different than a residential subdivision as we commonly think. This particular provision, or this particular adjustment that's requested by Mr. Frederick is associated with one of his clients is looking at the possibility, if this provision is approved, he has an existing building that he is considering retrofitting as a mixed-use building. But as an existing building, they're having difficulty coming up with that 200 square feet. So they said, well, what if we provided amenities that offset part of it? And when you're dealing with a retrofit situation such as that, I think it makes a lot of sense, actually. Unfortunately, we just can't write the ordinance where it's going to address every conceivable combination of land use that could ever happen with properties.
And I guess for me, I don't look at single buildings as it applies to that specific example. For me, I would look at a larger property, and let's take Hagerstown Prime Outlets. Let's say they annexed into the city, wanted to do this, you know what I mean? That to me is a different animal
Right.
in terms of that conversion and retrofit process.
Right.
That I just wouldn't want to lose, and again, I think it's even more important.
I think with
Further out
a
now,
situation
yeah.
like that, it would go through a re-subdivision process, and then open space would probably be addressed at that time. Probably the better comparable to use here is comparing it to an apartment complex. An apartment complex that has a basketball court for the residents of the complex is under no obligation to make it available to anybody on the outside. So I think it's probably a better comparison.
Like
Compare-
walking gardens.
Yeah, something like that. In this particular case, what we're dealing with is an individual property that may have an existing building that somebody's converting to a mixed-use building, or maybe it's raw land and they're going to build a building or two that have commercial on the first floor and apartments above, and those residents need something. They just can't have just their apartment. So that's what this is designed to set. It doesn't get into subdivisions or anything like that. It's strictly retrofitting existing buildings in the commercial districts for mixed use or building new ones and making sure that there's reasonable open space and amenities for the people who live there.
Yeah, I wrestle with that public versus,
Yeah.
but you're the one in the office that would have to wrestle that when you get the call.
Think about it, like I said, more along the lines of an apartment complex providing amenities for the people who pay rent there.
Okay.
Is that?
You don't have anything else?
So we're going to introduce an ordinance to adopt all of these then? We're good at this point? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve.
Steve?
Joanna, you coming up for this one? Okay.
Mr. Flynn?
Fine.
All right. Steve, stay there. Requested amendment, Dalba annexation agreement.
Thank you. Kathy Marr, who would normally be handling this, sends regrets. She's on city business down in Annapolis this afternoon, so I'm sitting in for her. With me is Mr. Pat Flynn. He is the legal representative of the property owners associated with the Daub Farm. Just give you a little bit of background, especially for the new folks on the council. A very large piece of property out on the very eastern edge of the city known as the Daub Farm. It's about 112 acres in area. It's located, if you're coming in from Frederick, it's that large farm that's on your right-hand side before you get off on the dual highway. It's currently zone CR, Commercial Regional. Property was annexed into the city 2008, 2010 era, and at the time, there were a number of conditions that were placed on the annexation. At the time, there was a developer lined up who was going to do a regional shopping center and entertainment center on the property, plus I believe an apartment complex on part of it. By the time it went through the annexation process and dealing with getting approval from the county commissioners for the consistency of zoning, the developer at that time the market changed and they walked away. So the property's been kind of sitting there looking for a developer since about 2010. There is interest in the property now. There is a pending PUD proposal that is going through the planning commission process and will be coming to you shortly. But in going back through the files, the annexation agreement back in a 2008-02 had a number of conditions associated with it that are not tenable anymore due to the change in the market, or don't really have a rational legal nexus to requiring them as part of the annexation. So the city and the applicant have been in discussions, come up with a new proposal for annexation conditions. The way the existing annexation agreement is, it can only be changed with approval of both the city and the applicants. Mr. Flynn is their attorney. So with that, in your packet on page 2, there's a list of the conditions as they currently exist. I'm not going to belabor it by reading them all into the record. On page 3, there is a proposed revised list of conditions. And staff believes that to make these adjustments to the annexation agreement in order for the property to be more usable or developable, probably is a better word for it, within the context of the current market and current zoning of the property. Lynn, do you have anything to add?
Only that I want to thank you for your time. I know that Mr. Daub was on his way here from Baltimore. He must have gotten stuck in traffic. He's probably going to walk in at any moment, but we're very excited to finally get this thing jump-started, get it moving. The annexation agreement itself and the idea of amending the annexation agreement is really geared toward doing 3 things. We wanted to have the city and the staff and Mr. Bachmiller involved in all the details. And so we're trying to proceed through a PUD process, which will create the maximum amount of involvement for the city. Secondly, we want to make this viable. We want this to actually happen this time, and we want to finish, right? So we don't want to get halfway into a project and then have it stop or have it come off the rails. So what we're doing is we're phasing the project and in a way to support the upfront costs and also to ensure that, and this is the primary component, that we're locking in the access to the dual highway. One of the main components of this project is that we'd be creating a new access to the dual highway direct into the new site. And the way we're doing that, in the old deal back in 2009, it talked about that the parties were going to work with the city and do our best kind of language. But in this revised agreement that we're trying to have approved here, makes that access required, mandatory, and it sets out outside limits. So by the 10th anniversary of the Phase 1 approvals, we would have to dedicate that ground. And it also sets out deadlines for getting it built based on whether it's going through a PUD overlay process or whether it's utilizing its by right commercial zoning if the PUD were not to be approved. So there again, we're trying to lock in the access to the dual highway. We're trying to make the whole thing viable. And we're trying to keep the city involved in every step of the details. So we hope that we can amend the agreement.
So will this create another entrance at the residence? Because we had a pretty packed house with that meeting here. Planning Commission, that was, a lot of the folks' concern is the traffic there.
Absolutely.
And that would take, because I think that was a big concern and didn't want to make it more congested than what it is already on the dual highway and everything.
Exactly. So we've had a traffic study completed with regard to supporting the initial phase of houses. And the connection with the dual highway will, over time, become a third access point for those houses. At the initial stage, it wouldn't be dedicated yet because until we know what phase 2 will look like in terms of commercial and industrial uses, we would have a significant risk of having to redo the design for the access. Because depending on what happens with the industrial and commercial areas, that access might have to look slightly different. So we're 100% committed to making that access happen. We want to do it right, and we only want to do it once.
So they have to wait till phase 1 is built until that's going to happen.
That's what we're proposing.
Okay.
And that's what the traffic study supports in terms
And
of,
do you know how long that might be for phase 1?
well, it's as soon as possible, but one of the things we've done in the annexation agreement to try to lock ourselves in is say, no matter what, by the 10th anniversary of the phase 1 approvals, we have to dedicate that ground for that road.
Okay.
And so, we hope to be moving a lot faster. But that's a no matter what kind of obligation on our parts in the new agreement.
Because that's what, basically the residents, they filled up in here and that was their main concern was traffic and getting in and out of there. So,
Yes, yeah, I understand. I wasn't at that meeting, but I've heard about it.
How do you propose to deal with getting the road built? It's one thing to dedicate the land, it's another to actually build the road.
Yes, absolutely. So the mechanism in the agreement would require that it could be developed under one of two scenarios. So we've tried to cover them both in the agreement. If the development moves forward under a PUD overlay, which is what we'd like to see, then we have to have that access point built and usable by the time one of three things happens. Either any industrial flex gets approved, one. Two, anything more than 25,000 square feet of commercial, or three, anything more than that 415th residential unit. So those are three separate triggers that would require us to have that access built and operating.
So just to be clear, the current annexation agreement conditions, there were 7. The requested conditions, there would be 3 with A and B under 3,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
What is the proposal to get access to the dual highway? Maybe where?
not
Maybe where is the better question.
Oh,
So I see Landis Road, I see Day Road.
I have a drawing up here. So technically, what's in front of the council currently is the annexation agreement, although it's obviously tied with the PUD
Right, I see that.
overlay. The bubble plan currently, I can pass this around, I can just hand this over to you. I only made the one copy.
Staff would caution you all that this is going to be subject to a public hearing process for you next month. So I would encourage you not to get into any sort of detailed analysis or discussion about this plan because you'll have to do that in a public hearing format, because you'll be making legal decisions based on that.
That's exactly right. But it is difficult to unmake the omelet a little bit here. So that drawing does depict the access into the dual highway from the neighborhood there on the bottom. And Mr. Dalba is here if you had any questions about the property. He came in while I was talking.
And the city attorney, Ann Rotz, who's been representing the city in this discussion, is here as well.
What is the impetus for it making it to this table at this time?
The conditions that are in place currently on the annexation prohibit the PUD from moving forward or even considered. Because it requires, for example, a 40-foot buffer along Landis Road. Well, the proposal does not have a 40-foot buffer, that kind of thing. So the idea is to basically, it's a cleanup effort is what we're doing here at the annexation level, to prime the property for it to be considered for a PUD as it moves forward.
And from our perspective, the impetus is that we have Dan Ryan Builders in line to get started, and we have the market for it. We want to get moving.
I think I'm trying to figure out how to separate in my mind the appearance of two things that appear to be happening at once that are supposed to happen one after the other. Am I missing that?
The annexation process is moving a little bit ahead of the PUD.
Right, but I feel like we concluded that annexation process. We're reopening that item. At the same time, a development proposal is attempting to move through a planning process before we have concluded the reopening of conditions that we may apply to changes in an annexation agreement. I guess for me, I think for simplicity's sake, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking, and I appreciate the comment that you really, it's hard to sort of unmake one, but it seems to me that you can't logically expect to look at your planning commission and say, hey, planning commission, make decisions on this development proposal while we decide whether we're going to revisit conditions of an annexation agreement that may change and impact your review and analysis and approval of a development proposal. I don't know how you do both at once and then expect your planning commission to administer the directives of the code and the elected body while you're determining what those directives are going to be. It doesn't make sense to me.
I think some of the timing here has been problematic, and some of that is because the developer does have a potential to move forward, and, we've been trying not to thwart that as best we can. And like Steve said, one of the things we're running into is because of some of the terms of the existing agreement, the potentially best option from the developer's perspective for that land is not available because of a 40-foot buffer that's in the annexation agreement.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
And something that we have really struggled with, I think Mr. Flynn would agree with this, is what language goes in the annexation agreement, because we don't want to tie the hands of the planning commission, right? We don't want to put anything in this annexation agreement that makes it look like something is a foregone conclusion that is not intended to be a foregone conclusion. So I agree with you that there is a lot here that is muddled that in ideal circumstances would not be.
Also, not looking to tie the hands of this body as it moves forward when it has its public hearing on the PUD as well. So not only is it just the planning commission, but it's also this body here. Because it's basically going to be a two-step process with you all. First is are you amenable to adjusting the annexation agreement to lift some of these conditions, change them around to make the property more readily available for a PUD to move forward? And then the second step is the actual zoning document of the PUD, which is already in process and is kind of moving along. It's kind of layered a little bit.
But you're asking me to do that. You're asking me to do that and pretend not to be hamstrung by the conditions of annexation that were purposefully set. So it's hard for me to say, okay, I'm gonna reconsider these annexation conditions, right? Which were very purposeful in why they were put forth. But what I also hear you saying is I can't look at the PUD ideas in considering if I want to make changes to the conditions of the annexation that folks put in place for specific reasons and not look at those concepts as they apply to the reasons they were put in place to begin with. You would think you'd want to resolve the annexation conditions issue, you know what I mean? And then give consideration to a PUD that can fit within the conditions of the annexation. You can't say, hey, we want you to consider changes to these annexation conditions that were put in place, but you can't look at this PUD proposal to do that. Right? Because even the singular question is I look on a map and go, how are they going to get to the dual highway, is purposeful as it applies to the very reason part of the conditions were put in place during that annexation analysis to say, hey, we hear you loud and clear out there, public. That's something that has to happen. And we're going to tie it in the very beginning of this process to make sure it happens. And now you want me to undo it and do it an entirely different way without considering, you know, the purpose for which the current applicant is asking it to be done. So what are we allowed to and not allowed to look at for the absolutely separate matter of changes to the conditions of the annexation?
You want me to work on that one, or you want to?
I mean, from my perspective, I don't know it's a matter of what you're allowed to and not allowed to. Is I think that staff was trying to keep this a more streamlined process. And those are my words, not staff's. I mean, from a legal perspective, I'll tell you that there are existing conditions in the annexation agreement that I think it's in our best interest to get rid of. Though when it comes down to some of the nitty gritty of what the developer would like, you know, that's more of a political decision than a legal decision. But I mean, if the developer wishes to share, oh, go ahead.
I think it's a political decision more than a legal decision to the degree folks compelled to engage in it legally do or don't do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are some positions in the existing agreement that I think are legally problematic, that I would like to go away if we're redoing this agreement. And then there are other things that have been satisfied, so they don't need to continue on, like the condition regarding property taxes. But, I mean, if council wishes to see more information than what's being presented, I think, and developer wants to share that, then I don't know that there's a reason that we can.
Yeah. As your staff, I'm just cautioning you a little bit, just knowing that the rezoning process is a legal process. It's subject to hearings where you take testimony and make decisions based on the testimony. Mr. Flint's right, you know, you can't unmake the omelet, and you're going to want to have a general idea of what is initially being thought is being proposed. But if you look at the conditions that are currently in place, most of them really don't have a whole lot to do with the actual development of the property. The one big exception being the 40-foot buffer along Landis Road, which is proposed to be removed. And in her memo, Ms. Marr pointed out that our ordinances have evolved so much over the last 15 years or so that those things can be addressed better through the administration of our land development ordinances.
And let me be simple about this then. Because in this memo, you have a statement that basically says, city or the county and state have looked at this and they're generally okay with the traffic analysis. I
Can you
don't.
tell me where you are?
I don't know where it's at. Let me find it. There, item number 4, second page. All traffic improvements shall be developed in conjunction with SHA and the county and the city. It said somewhere in here that I guess the county and the state have looked at it. I don't know where I saw that part. I know I read it. I know I read that somewhere.
You did. I'm looking forward as well. It's a true statement. The county and the state have looked at the traffic and they've,
So they have conducted their traffic analysis of your traffic impact study and they have approved it.
correct.
That's correct?
It's under the staff recommendation on the back of on the middle of page 4.
So that has been completed.
Preliminary analysis, yeah.
Okay. Because that's the elephant in the room, right? It's traffic. And what I don't want to happen is I don't want to get into a situation on the north side of the dual highway in this area that I see every day when I go to and from work on the west or south side of the dual highway, where that development has been built along, I guess that's Beaver Creek Road. And you go to the top of the hill, go down, you got that entire housing development that comes out on one little street, right in the middle of a very small Beaver Creek Road with 2 bus stops right out on the main part, right at the crest of the hill. And every day I'm like, who would have allowed that many houses to be constructed in that manner, in that location, with roads of that nature, with one ingress and egress, you know what I mean, of that magnitude, without the consideration of having interconnectivity of streets and access points before you reached 200-300 houses?
And I think the point being made is that those are very good questions, but they are ones best handled at the PUD overlay stage and also with the development plans that would come
I
before
disagree
the
with
planning
that.
commission.
I disagree with that. We should have that in place. That was part and parcel to the inclusion of these statements within the annexation agreement to ensure that a property of this size out in this area, accessing roads of this nature, would have adequate traffic flow, ingress and egress, out of the gate at appropriate time intervals. That there would be no like question about that.
So what we've done to try to strike that balance, because I understand what you're saying. What we've done to try to strike that balance is we're trying to push a lot of the detail work into the PUD process, which is, in our opinion, made for that. But we've also, in the proposed annexation agreement, incorporated these full stop obligations on the developer's part to create that connection. So we're saying in the annexation agreement, that connection is required, capital R, period, right? We're saying that by the 10th anniversary of the first phase approvals, we have to dedicate that land, full stop. We're saying that if it develops under a PUD overlay, then we have to build that access by a certain specified period, triggered by either industrial flex development, commercial development, or residential development. So we have tried to build those safety mechanisms. I'm not sure what phrase you want to use, but we've tried to lock ourselves into those commitments in the annexation agreement while still pushing a lot of the detail work into the overlay process, the PUD process, such that staff can be involved and we can meet all of the development requirements that have grown up in the code.
So here's a difference. At that time, the primary access was shown via a new road to the dual highway. The full stop in the revised proposal says you'll build 415 houses on the secondary roads before we get to what would have been the primary road onto Dual Highway.
Correct.
And that's precisely where the traffic study comes in, which studied that question, and that's what the county and the state have reviewed.
This is one of those rare situations where this body will actually get two bites of the apple. First, you have the one amending the annexation agreement, which staff's intent was basically to clean it up essentially. When the PUD comes in and you have a public hearing for it and you determine whether or not you're going to allow this particular PUD to move forward, you will have a bite of the apple there again, because you can also put conditions on that rezoning if you were inclined to approve it.
The only way that I would consider the changes as proposed at the annexation level is if I get to see and digest the traffic impact studies and the comments of the city and, or the county and the state, because that appears to be the largest material change between then and now. And it's clear that, you know, between 15 years ago and now, traffic certainly hasn't gotten less.
And actually, this is where the way the process is working itself out actually kind of works to your benefit, because even though it's a two-step process and we have them running close, you're not going to be able to approve the PUD if you're inclined to do so without first amending the annexation agreement. So as you're reviewing it now, and then you'll be reviewing the PUD overlay here within the next few weeks, at some point, you'll need to make a decision on how to amend and how to agree to amend the annexation agreement. And that will need to be in place before you introduce an ordinance to amend the zoning map to adopt the PUD.
And it may be possible, this may already be the case, but it may be possible to schedule those meetings such that the council is able to see all the information prior to the first vote, because we have the work meetings and then you have vote meetings, right? Is that already the case, or can that be done?
You'll end up, this body will have a public hearing at the end of March for the PUD, where they'll actually take testimony from the public and from the applicant and everything. During that time period, you could still be working your way through this annexation arrangement, determining what is the appropriate agreement to come to, but whatever agreement is come to has to be in place before a law is, or an ordinance is introduced to amend the zoning map. So this,
Councilmember,
it's, like I said, this is actually, it seems awkward, but it actually works to your benefit, because you can end up looking at both of these issues at the same time. It's just that one ultimately is going to have to be acted on before the other.
Councilmember Alshire, can I ask clarifying questions? And I apologize, I was in court this morning, so it's possible I'm just missing it. But, so the current annexation agreement provides for the second means of access to the property. The proposal also provides for that, I believe. Your concern, I think, is the timing of that?
I don't think it's simply the timing, but
Okay.
the position in which they exist.
Okay,
Take this example. Let's say when we approved the large warehouses that come off the Howell Road. I mean, if we'd have said, you know what, for the first 10 years, those warehouses can come off Howell Road, you know, and within 10 years, we want you to build the road out to the Dole. You see what I mean?
sure.
Like, I feel like that's the difference.
So
That's
whether,
being proposed here.
okay,
Because it appears at the time of that annexation, there was at least some guarantee of the body deliberating on the matter that the primary access would be to the Dual, which is clearly a much more functional access than the hold your breath and drive across off of Day and Landis out onto the Dual right now, right? I mean, anybody that does that, that's what you're doing at that particular point. That can't be the primary initial access
okay,
for a 10-year period for 400 and some houses out of the gate. And that's what I said, for me, I'd love to see the county and the state's deliberation and determination on that, you know, with an understanding of how those roads function now, because they don't function in a vacuum. Because now there are 300 or 400 houses that empty out onto the dual at those intersections as well from the backside of Beaver Creek Road. And you have an entirely new intersection from the warehouse development that wraps around the boulevard. You know what I mean? So it hasn't declined over 15 years, in which we said, we need you to do this because that's what's going to be the most functional. It's actually increased. So it seems odd to me to go backwards and say, okay, we realize traffic has significantly increased and road structure has significantly increased, but we're going to want you to go to the back roads as being your primary access and put the primary one that we thought was going to happen on the back burner.
Okay, thank you.
And that's why I said it was weird for me to see that, think of it in my mind, but not be able to look at how that diagram is going to actually work and verify that you have the land, you have the access and the approval from the state to actually get out onto the dual highway at the location you propose. Otherwise, you've approved something that's never going to happen.
Any other questions?
Does council,
Are you pondering something?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw attention to Kathy's summary here real quick. I think it lays it out pretty well. Since review of the PUDR is currently occurring concurrently, the final language on the conditions in the annexation agreement could be tweaked if necessary as the mayor and council reach a consensus on the PUDR. So these are going to be
That's
over.
the paragraph.
They're going to, yeah, they're going to be, the two processes are going to be layered on one another, and the information is going to, as Mr. Flynn said, you can't unmake the omelet. You're going to have that information as part of this process.
is there other information that council wants to see or questions that you have that you want to make sure that we address before we come back? Councilmember Alshire requested the traffic information. But I want to make
Yeah,
sure
that's just the
that,
big thing is traffic, because that's where all the residents, when they came to the planning commission, that was their main concern about how they're gonna get in and out of the new neighborhood and things like that, so making sure their concerns are being addressed, because I don't, I'm all for growth and development, but we've got to do it smart, and, folks got to take a left-hand turn when it's, trafficy, and you can't do that, it's kind of hard to make them really happy building something new they can't get out of, so that's my concern.
okay,
For me as well, it's just understanding the traffic flow, and I would just want to thoroughly read over this.
Now,
When when I have.
no question, would that come before the public hearing? The information, the traffic study, or that's part of the public hearing? Like, when will we see that
I
information?
don't see any reason why you couldn't have it before.
I don't either.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just data as far as volumes and such, and no reason why you couldn't see that as part of discussing the annexation agreement.
It may be presented to you again as part of the public hearing, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's no reason that it couldn't be presented in advance so that you all have time to look at it, digest it that way. When there is a public hearing, you're able to ask questions and get the specific information you need if it's not in what's been provided.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And as they're being done concurrently, again, there's going to be a lot of overlap. The one thing that you can't do is you can't approve the zoning before you approve the change to the annexation agreement.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Next up, Chapter 224, vacant abandoned tax sale property, proposed changes. Paul Paul and Amanda Gregg.
Do you want me to stay here?
You can go if you want to. Voice.
I think we should make her stay.
Stay just in case.
Her name is William.
So, Ann has been very useful during this whole entire process of Chapter 224 rewrite here, so we appreciate her continued attendance tonight.
This is 224 is what that called. The 224.
Oh, yes, please.
So to give some of the council just an update on where this all came from. So in 2020, the city adopted Chapter 224, the tax sale repurpose program, basically of how to acquire properties through the tax sale process and to repurpose them. Unfortunately, there are kind of some challenges that arose with this. Basically, one of them being that the city would not actually take the tax certificate until we had an end user already basically under contract with the city that they wanted the property. But they couldn't actually see the properties themselves. It was just basically sight unseen. They kind of could see it from the outside, and that was pretty much about it. In 2023, the Maryland General Assembly adopted a change to Maryland law where it allowed the local municipalities to withhold properties from the tax sale. We jumped on this process. We withheld 23 properties from the tax sale and started this process of us being able to acquire properties. Now, where do we stand on all of this? Well, right now, we have the tax certificates for 23 properties. Amanda worked diligently on acquiring those properties from the county treasurer. It was quite the process to keep everyone on task to make sure that we got these tax certificates. And we, as a jurisdiction, still have to wait the 6 months like any private sale occurs, that has to wait the 6 months before the city can actually file a right of redemption foreclosure process with circuit court. That date for the city to be able to file on these 23 ones is March 4th of 2025. So within a few weeks, we can actually do that. But we do have to do a whole entire, search of the lien process to see who are all the interested parties in the actual properties. And our attorney, Ann Rotz, is currently working through those 23 parcels. We decided to give her a whole bunch of them rather than just a handful. So that's where we stand currently on that. And then also the last administration, one of the last acts that they actually had done was choosing the next 6 properties that would be withheld from the next tax sale, which is going to occur here in June. And there's identified 6 properties that will be withheld. And those lists are in the first attachment in your packet. So what we're proposing here tonight is, after working with staff and then also working with legal counsel, we're looking to provide a more smoother process for the title transfer to an end user. A lot of the general concepts with the adopted ordinance in 2020 remain, but it's kind of making this process a little bit more smoother and making it more available to people. One of the first is that our ordinance before said that it had to be a 501c3 nonprofit to be considered first consideration. Through the review process, there are other nonprofit organizations in the state of Maryland that might not be the 501c3 classifications, or open it up to any state level nonprofit organization that had housing options. The ordinance also shifted the responsibility away from the Community and Economic Development Department and shifting it to a committee that would be appointed by the city administrator. And this would include people not only with community and economic development, but also with construction permits, vacant licensing, grant funding, and other experience as the administrator deemed appropriate to try to move these tax sale properties. It also clarified the process on how to certify that the tax sale properties would be withheld from a upcoming tax sale. What we did was that we condensed the process for the end user to the end user. There's basically 4 channels that a tax sale property could fall into. These would be where it would be a vacant, undevelopable land. It'd be vacant, developable land, structures in need of rehabilitation, and then structures requiring demolition. Those 4 processes stay the same, that they exist, but we were able to condense it down into 2 processes to an end user. The first one being the vacant, undevelopable land, and then the other 3 categories could be reduced down into one same process. So that basically the city would have where we would get proposals for the end user if by nonprofit organizations. And then if no nonprofit organization came forward, they were interested in a property that could be redeveloped, whether or not be land or rehab, then it would go to the MLS process, which Amanda's familiar with. That's actually how we ended up selling the 2 properties on South Prospect Street that the city had, that we went through our own MLS process of listing the properties for sale. Now, the properties, they did not change, the proposed changes did not affect on how people could voluntarily transfer a property to the city of Hagerstown. That was Councilmember Alshire's suggestion back when it was first adopted in 2020. So it did not change that process. But we did codify what it means to be in good standing with the city to be able to be considered for these. We did not want to have a property owner come forward with a proposal that might not be in good standing with the city as far as delinquent on taxes or with utility bills or other considerations that are there that we just would want everyone to be in good standing with the city. We also adopted a policy in 2020 that was in conjunction with this ordinance where it was to maintain a master list of pre-approved nonprofit organizations that would get the information out to them so they could bid on the properties or make proposals to acquire the property. Since we've changed the process, and the state has too, that you don't have to actually go through the conversation of we have these properties or we could obtain these properties and we would consider you for potential end user. Now the city's acquiring the properties, we're holding the tax certificates, we don't need to maintain that master list. We can put it out publicly that these properties are available and the nonprofits would have the first option for those. And then if no nonprofit is interested, then we would move forward with a MLS listing. Therefore, the policy of it being for a master list to be maintained just kind of didn't have its juice anymore. It didn't need to exist there. We did make modifications to the policy though to guide staff on the committee that would be appointed by the administrator on how to rank the proposals that we would receive for from a nonprofit or for MLS listings on those. The one thing to know is that the transfer of any property is always at the approval for the mayor and council. So the mayor and council would have the absolute options to decide who the property would get transferred to as a vote by ordinance. So those were some of the changes that we had proposed, and the attachments that are included is also the list of the properties we acquired through the 2023 tax sale withholdings, and then the ones we're withholding in 2025. There's a red line version of the changes to chapter 224. When you look at the red line changes, it is a lot of red, which is why attachment number 3 is actually what the final version of the ordinance would look like that we worked with the attorney on. Then it's the proposed policy for chapter 224 to guide staff on the ranking of the proposals for acquiring a property for an end user to consider, and then also the ranking matrix that the committee would use to determine where a applicant would fall in the end user process. And then we would present any type of end user to the council for approval after it would go through committee review. So Amanda and I are here for any questions that you may have on this, and legal counsel as well for questions about these changes.
I have a question about the vacant lots.
Mm-hmm.
So all the properties that are listed are just going to be considered for not like 501c3s, nonprofits, right?
Correct.
Even
Well,
the vacant lots?
so it's kind of a little bit. So first, for a vacant land, it's consideration of the next door neighbors basically have the ability for the vacant lot first.
So if they're
'cause these are
beside it, they can-
undevelopable.
Yeah, so you need to categorize the properties first as to whether the land can be developed or it cannot be. So
Okay.
there are certain parcels on there that, because of changes to city code, are no longer large enough to build on.
Okay.
So for the ones that are not large enough to build on, we follow a certain process, which basically is we contact neighboring landowners to see if any of them are interested in taking on that property.
Gotcha.
Right? Because there's limited uses
Right.
to that. Then there's a separate process that we follow for land that can be developed, whether that's vacant land, land that has a structure on it that has to be demolished, or has a structure on it that can be rebuilt. So there's a separate process for that. But for land that is too small to be developed, we're looking first to the neighboring landowners.
Okay, and I'm asking that because I'm pretty sure the vacant lots on Jonathan Street, they're gonna be too small to technically build anything on it.
Every vacant lot that's listed in the 2023 is too small to be
Too small.
built.
So like, for example, there's a couple there, so you would just offer it to whoever's next to it if there's, are you saying they get like, the resident or the business that's there currently, they would get first dibs on that lot first? And then if they decide to pass on it or however that works, then
No, then it goes to nonprofits.
okay, so, but it definitely has to be a nonprofit
First.
first.
And then it will go to MLS after that.
Okay, all right.
But it's like we said, it's undevelopable. So those lots in particular on Jonathan Street are less than, I mean,
Right.
some of those are less than 2,500
Right.
square feet. You need 5,000 square feet to build a home.
Because I know we spoke
Correct.
about the Jonathan Street plots before, and I wanted to turn them into,
So that's the process that
okay,
we would go through if you just want to make a note, and then you can kind of look, and those would be the steps we're proposing for those lots.
I think we're answering about 224-7, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
And remember, the goal here is to get the land from unproductive use to productive use.
right,
And the second goal is for the city not to become the owner of them,
Right.
right? So what we tried to do in amending Chapter 224 was to prioritize who we think would be best at converting that land into something productive, for land that can be developed ideally to make it affordable housing. And then, if, I think in all of them, we've given ourselves at least 2 or 3 steps that we can go through, because what we don't want is for the city to become the owner of 23 new parcels.
could we, for example, since they are so they're small, like you said, could it kind of be gifted to that community? And they could, whether it be a community garden and.
I
Still
think,
have to be a entity that it would have to be gifted to.
right, I think there would
That
have to be
entity,
some
yeah.
sort of organization.
Okay, like for example, the Progressive Men's Club is right there. They've been trying to get one of them for quite some time. I don't know if they're considered, Councilmember Burnett, are they considered a nonprofit or like, what are they?
Something like a nonprofit.
So
I would
would
imagine
they
if they're
be-
a social club, they would be.
Yes, or could that be an option for them?
Potentially.
And,
And I think they
and
back up to one of the vacant, they're a neighbor to it anyway.
of one of them on the other side.
Yeah,
So
I
they
think the one beside it is,
This list
Park.
is more abnormal than I think we're gonna run into.
Right.
Unfortunately, this list is mostly vacant properties
Yeah.
or
That
demo.
have sat for decades.
I mean, they've sat so long. Our new lists that are gonna come forth, we're hoping these properties will be more that we can rehab, or put a new structure on, because the ultimate goal is not to have a bunch of vacant property
right,
all over
you want to
the
do
city.
something,
We want to
with
have
it.
this developed.
develop it.
Yeah.
That goes towards affordable housing opportunities.
Yes.
Which is why
This-
where the nonprofits come.
This list
Gotcha.
is just extremely large, just because these have been sitting for so long and it's taken us this long to get here through this process. That I don't think everybody has really realized all the hoops that you have to get through to get to
Oh,
this
yeah.
point.
It's been a learning curve along the way. And the one thing,
2013, Paul.
the one thing that you'll note in the ordinance as well, that we always leave as the last step that the city will take a look back at these properties and determine what aligns with the strategic goals that are adopted by the mayor and city council as well. So there is an opportunity that we could look at that, like you're talking about community garden, that is one of your strategic goals that you may adopt next week. And that would be something that if it went through the whole entire process of that, no neighbors were interested, no nonprofit was interested in the property, if we put it on MLS, no one's interested in it, the mayor and city council can decide what may align with their strategic goals that could be done to that parcel to get enticement to do something with it.
Now, as far as if they're not interested, is it presented to them or is it kind of like they just kind of got to know?
For the neighboring property?
Yes.
So we will reach out to them through certified mail. But when I've done it before, when we were trying to get people without acquiring the tax certificates, I went out and talked to the neighbors. I knocked on their doors, had meetings with them, explained what the process was. Very open about it, but we will send things certified mail just to make them aware as well.
Okay. If you do that, if you take that route, I would like to do that with you.
For all of them? Or
Well, no.
For
On the
Johnson Street,
ones?
like
Okay, no
if that's the route you're gonna take, to kind of like go to the door and talk to them, I would like to be present with you if that's okay.
Oh, not a problem.
I mean,
I'd
you've
like
got
one of
Jonathan,
them.
you've got Clarkson, you've got, so all of those properties.
Clarkson.
Clarkson's a vacant lot.
I'm trying to think where.
Clarkson
Like
is,
an alley.
it's an end of a street, it's off Pennsylvania Avenue, you like
Oh,
Scott said,
okay,
right
now I
by
know.
Janice's house
Yeah,
there.
right.
go
Before
right
you
down to
cross the
end.
railroad track.
That's correct.
And
Okay.
it's the end parcel there. The city actually already owns the vacant lot that's beside this one that's on this list.
Yep.
Okay,
When we were demolishing that property back in the day, we had to buy the neighboring property because it started to collapse as well. So we had to take both properties down.
one other I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Any of the properties that are, I guess, deemed to be demolished, is, how does that process work?
Well, as far as deeming them demolished, so we obtained administrative search warrants and went into each property, took a structural engineer with us to evaluate the properties to determine their ability to remain standing. So they were deemed to be demolished. One of them is on the borderline right now. I mean, if we acquire it, it may be able to be
Lee
rehabbed.
Street, maybe?
Lee Street and actually Pennsylvania Avenue. Pennsylvania Avenue has a hole in the roof with a lot of the rain that we've gotten. I don't know how far
Lee
it's been
Street's
demolished. Lee Street is
Lean
lean.
back.
Lean
It's the back is pulling away from the property. It's about 2-inch gap at the top of it now, the old addition that was put on. But with some of those properties, so what we determine it's demolished, how we'll go through the process of
I guess
demolition.
I'm more or less referring to like whatever company comes in. Is that like a
Correct.
bid?
So one of the things that we're working on right now is an RFP that hopefully will get out soon. That will be a demolition contractor that we would have on retainer for the city to speed up the process of these demolitions. So once we actually obtained a title to it, and if we had an RFP out already, we could move forward with the demolition, and we would only come
We
in front
would
of the
demo it
council.
first.
Correct. The goal is to demolish the
It would
property
not be
first.
transferred and then require the
Gotcha.
person that takes
You
it
would
to
want
demo
it to-
it. We would
okay.
demo it.
The goal is that we would want to eliminate the blight from the community, and then we would have a redevelopment.
Yeah.
And part of this is where, right now, where some of the problems landed with these vacant lots is that they've been sitting vacant for so long that the nonconformity has expired on that parcel, so it could no longer be considered for redevelopment. Where when it's underneath the city ownership with the change in this ordinance, while under city ownership, the nonconformity wouldn't expire. So it gives us an opportunity to find an end user to infill that parcel later, and it would not expire during our ownership. So if we got transferred to a new person and they sat on it for 2 years, they lost their opportunity. Now they have a vacant lot. But the goal is to find end users that will actually
We
redevelop
put a time
quickly.
on that, didn't we?
Year, I think we did put a year timeline.
Part of that change is we didn't want them sitting, a new developer coming in and them still be vacant. So we did give a timeline on how long they have to start moving and developing the land.
I have just 2 comments. First, the changes, to be clear, the change is going to make the process easier or more streamlined for the end user, right? To reduce blight in our neighborhoods that we've been talking about for years, right? Okay. And second, for the committee and the criteria for ranking the applicants. What about, will there be opportunity for community members to speak on if one of these organizations were okay in their opinion? Like, I'm
Like a
just,
reference?
yeah, I'm just trying to think of like, if there's like, for the lots in the future, if there's any lots that could have like a liquor store put on that. If there'd be opportunity for the community members, like, oh, listen, there's already a liquor store nearby, we don't want that here. Or if there's a convenience store that is an area with the food desert, could the community be like, hey, I would love for this organization to be here because they're offering food. So would the committee and the criteria for ranking applicants offer an opportunity to get feedback from the community of which that property may lie in?
Right now, the process does not specifically provide for that when it comes to the committee. But what it does provide for is that coming out of the committee would be a presentation to the council. And then the decision, of course, is ultimately the council's. So if for some reason the committee did not receive that information or was not open to that, that could be presented to the council and that can be considered. You know, these are just like they become just like any other transfer of real estate, which means we have to do an ordinance. So you know it's a more involved process. So the council certainly will have the ability to weigh in and determine who actually gets the property.
Okay, thank you. I would suggest as this body, when that comes to be, to voice this is coming up, or a property is coming up, so we can make sure we get citizen comments or emails, or even show up at the neighborhood first meetings if there's anyone in particular in that area. I think we should do that. Just a suggestion.
We also know these properties so well that we can even, make that recommendation that we would really like for, instead of you building a house there, maybe there would be an opportunity for a general store or for, some other type of enterprise going in there.
Yeah.
Instead of it being a house.
Yeah, because I mean, this is a great program, right?
Yeah.
So we're reducing blight, but I just don't want us to put in a situation where we'll have properties that just are more harmful because we want to
Yeah,
get something in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Instead of just evaluating the
The
circumstances.
way it is designed currently is that the properties are intended to be used for affordable housing to the extent the property can be developed.
And zoned that way. Has to be in a zoning
Yeah.
category that way.
Right, and to the best of my knowledge, everything that we have here would be residential.
Right.
So we don't have, there's not even the possibility of kind of a commercial entity trying to snap it up and trying to take it away and make it perhaps not the best use. The other thing that we're intending, and this again will come before the council for approval, is putting requirements into the contracts so that if I purchase one of these, I'm agreeing that I'm gonna build it according to a certain timeline. And that if I don't, then there are ramifications. And that property potentially comes back in to the city, for the city then to find someone who's gonna really be serious. Because what we don't want is for these properties to transfer to someone else, but then just
Just
sit.
sit.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't.
No, that.
I
And-
agree.
Serves
And
no
that's,
purpose.
Right.
that's one of the reasons that the code specifically provides that for properties that need to be demolished, so for safety or because it would be cost prohibitive to rehab them, that the city will demolish them prior to any transfer.
Right.
Because we don't want to transfer it to someone and then they're like, I'll get around to that or never get around to demolishing it. And we have the same issue that we started with.
You're definitely going to see that opportunity as we go forward into these next properties.
Yeah.
Once
This
we
one's
get
not
through
gonna see
these,
as much.
yeah,
The
these
next
legacy
one, next
properties.
round will be much more impactful.
Yep.
And I can tell you, we visited the sites and, I mean, the neighbors they're ready. They're ready for us to get moving. I mean, they're excited for these
Yeah,
properties
I just-
to either come down or something happen.
I just want us to be really, really vocal about this, because
Right.
this is a great opportunity, and I think
I
that
agree.
we should broadcast it as much as we can.
I would think state law is finally settled enough now, as we've been going through this, they've kind of, whoops, now we got to deal with this. I think that's starting to settle down. It's going to allow us to move.
And I
pretty
think the
quickly.
more involvement we have,
The better off.
particularly the more people who are interested in these properties,
Yep.
then the better off we'll be, because then the best solution gets selected for a property. And then ideally, people see that succeed, and then more people become interested.
Yep.
Are we good with the changes that we're proposing? And if so, then we'll get that for introduction next week then, if that works. I know I just handed Dan when I said that, but.
Yeah, yes.
Almost there, Paul.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next up, review of recommended consultant for next 10-year downtown plan, Doug Reeser.
Okay, if you need me to.
No, you're good.
The boys are with Grammy. Superfluous.
So we're here to talk about the recommended consultant for the next 10-year downtown plan. A quick primer, the current and first iteration of the downtown plan was done in 2014. Several catalytic suggestions, recommendations were provided, and most of the majority of them have been implemented. And so it's time for a new one, since it's also been over 10 years. So staff review team, we're recommending the proposal submitted by Urban Partners in association with MKSK. The total price proposal submitted is $196,264, and there's a more comprehensive breakdown attached in this packet. But we're ultimately recommending this consultant team for the following reasons: the cohesiveness of the team and demonstrated experience working together, recognition of Hagerstown's current stage of redevelopment and ability to take us to the next level, experience and ability to bring successful strategies from other downtowns to Hagerstown, assembled team with expertise in economic analysis and placemaking, and a strong community engagement strategy to ensure community ownership of the end product. We believe that the price proposal is justified by the proposal's higher level of economic analysis, holistic approach, and comprehensive community engagement, quality graphics presentation, and a robust team with expertise in the subject matter. And Doug has more information.
Yeah, so we received 13 proposals, so we're very excited to see that outstanding level of response from the consultants that submitted for this particular project. All of these proposals were very, very well put together, and, it almost felt like you couldn't make the wrong decision, but we had to get very into the weeds of why a certain selection would make sense. So out of those 13 proposals, we narrowed them to seven consultants for presentation interviews. So information from the interviews was reviewed, and the proposals were narrowed from that list of 7 to 3. And those 3, then we reviewed comparable plans that were developed and implemented in other communities. And from that 3, we ultimately selected the one. So the evaluation criteria for the RFP included the team qualifications, the project approach, and the quality of performance history for each of the applicants during the initial proposal submission, as well as the subsequent interview process. A cross-department team reviewed these applications for the RFP, including DCED, Department of Community and Economic Development, Planning and Code Administration, and Community Engagement Department. And just as a reminder, 50% of this RFP is going to be paid by the Appalachian Regional Commission grant as a funding source. But here for any questions related to the RFP and the consultants.
I have a question about the motion that's attached in our packet. Could we spell out where the funding's coming from, instead of just saying that
Sure,
we're spending 196?
sure, absolutely.
What did you ask? Were the fundings?
Yeah, we're.
Yeah, like where the
okay.
funding for the motion, so we have that on record.
Yep.
You said 50%, right?
Yes, and just to clarify, the consent form does have the funding sources outlined as the ARC grant and the general fund budget contingency line item, but we will get those included in the motion.
Okay, thank you. If we were to approve them, how soon could they get this done?
Right now, you can see that there's a timeline in there. I think that goes through September, but we anticipate them to start February 1st. I would say we're probably looking at September, October, November range of this year as far as a completed plan with a presentation, this body, and starting implementing those strategies. So we're looking towards the end of this year for implementation of the strategies.
I believe their plan was about 8 months.
Okay.
It's in the RFP. Let me try to find it too. About page. That's added too.
That's fine. But this year.
But yeah, it's about an 8-month timeline. Sort of finish we go.
I did see it.
Yeah, they proposed starting in February with an end date of September. So we're probably pushing this about a month. So we're probably looking to end in October range as far as completed plan.
It's on page 18 of their RFP.
There it is.
Thank you.
Others.
In the, just as a deadline for the Appalachian Regional Commission grant, it is, I believe it's February of 26. So this is well within the deadline for the grant period for that grant. With some buffer range if we need it.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
Great.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, Edgemont Reservoir, Nancy Hosbrow. Yes.
So I put together a fairly comprehensive package for you. I wanted to give you some history, partly for education of our new elected body, folks who are new to our elected body, and then as a refresher for the others. For me, this project goes back to 2006, so it's, feel like I've lived this history. The first thing I want to say is that we have a letter from MDE where they state that they considered the dam to be unsafe and the current condition to be unacceptable. And we have been consistently, since that time, trying to push this project forward. The last schedule that we submitted to MDE before everything got more or less shut down with the PMP evaluations was that the improvements would be completed in 2019. So just kind of a little bit of, where we thought we would be versus where we are. And it's in your documents, but the reservoir, the dam was constructed in 1902. The last major upgrade to the spillway was in 1993. The 2006 study identified seepage under the spillway. There was a subsequent study, it's in your packet, from 2016 from Triad Engineering. And one of the things, and you don't have to try to find it now, but when you're looking through it, you'll see this diagram. Blue is seepage. So that's what was discovered, or that was what was concluded, is that there was significant seepage, probably in the form of groundwater, and over time, natural erosion, of course, has increased that seepage. when we originally brought this project forward, it was to be a $2 to $3 million grouting project, literally, a $2 to $3 million grouting project. And that was kind of moving forward until the 2016 memo from the state. I guess to kind of, in 1993, when those upgrades were done, the probable maximum precipitation study that was done and the approved design by MDE was for 90% of the PMP, the probable maximum precipitation. MDE is now requiring that the emergency spillway OG be designed to 100% of the PMP. So that is one of the major deficiencies. To date, we've done 3 PMP studies, one for Maryland, one for Pennsylvania, one using Maryland's tool, one using Pennsylvania's tool, and one using Virginia's tool, and then we did a blended one. In your package, you'll see the PMP study from 2019 that includes Pennsylvania, Virginia, and a discussion on looking at the blended model and the direction to go. MDE decided, we don't have approval from MDE on any of the PMP studies. MDE's PMP, their tool is, back in 2019, was 20 plus years old. So MDE is just now completing, the final draft is done, their own PMP tool. They've updated it, taking things like climate resiliency and into consideration, and then looking at the topography, if you will, across the state, since it, much like Virginia, varies considerably. So we're still waiting on PMP. One of the other hurdles that we encountered in the 2019, give or take time period, was from DNR Fisheries, dealing with the conservation flow or the flow by. Currently, Warner Hollow goes directly into the Edgemont Reservoir, so there's no conservation or flow by for Warner Hollow. Raven Rock, 100% of the water that is in Raven Rock stays in Raven Rock right now. But what DNR Fisheries is going to require is that the conservation flow that we have to maintain in Raven Rock be a combination of what would have been required for Warner Hollow if it had been 100% captured into the reservoir. So we don't know exactly what that number is going to look like. We know our current flow by is 0.2 cubic feet per second. I've seen numbers as high as 2.2 cubic feet per second for the combined. One of the other issues that DNR Fisheries have is that there's a native viable trout population in Raven Rock specifically. And so we have to construct screening to prevent adult trout during spawning season from entering the reservoir because they essentially they can't spawn, they're not in warm water. So we have those additional fisheries requirements. The other requirement from DNR Fisheries is that they don't want warm water topping over the spillway and entering the stream because it'll warm up the water in the receiving stream and negatively impact not only the trout but other fish or organisms that depend on cooler water. So we have that also that we'll deal with, or that we are dealing with. The current design still sets at about 30%. And when we originally applied for renewed our appropriation, submitted our permit to renew our appropriation. Initially, we said, okay, we need to get this in and we don't want to, we're not going to go into a full-blown study. We want to get this renewed and then complete a study to see if we could do better. MDE said, no, we want you to do the study. The permit will essentially stay in effect until the study is complete. So we did, our current appropriation is 0.7 MGD with a max of 4.8 MGD, million gallons per day. We did ask for 2.75 million gallons per day average and 4.8 as the max. The state will consider that. However, if we move in that direction, it will be based on wet weather and dry weather. So during those times of the year where we get more precipitation or snow melt, more inflow into the reservoir, what we can take out of the reservoir will be a higher volume of water. During the dry months, it could be reduced down to the 0.7, and if a drought declaration occurs in Maryland, it could be reduced down to 0. That being said, at any given time, since it's not our primary source, during a drought declaration, MDE could require we go to 0, either way. But our current application that's on file with MDE is asking for 2.75 million gallons per day, average day. I don't have a good feel at this time whether or not the state is going to allow it. It requires that they kind of think outside of the box. And they're not moving forward on it until, I'm going to say, the Edgemont issues are resolved. The other thing I want to touch on is our funding application, what we have in funding. MDE previously approved $15.75 million. 1.5 million of that is grant and 14.25 is loan. So that's what we're setting on from a funding perspective. We did put in a new funding application, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The total application identifies $34,100,000, with 4.1 million of that being local share for engineering. We're hopeful that they'll apply, that they'll add to the 15.75. So kind of in a nutshell, that's where we're at with Edgemont. We've spent a little, I think 1.2 million, a little over $1 million in engineering fees. We have used a little, as approved by the mayor and council. We did use a little bit of the money from Hazen and Sawyer to begin looking at Antietam. We shut that down in October, so the money, so no money. We're not spending any money on the Antietam source water study right now. I did want to point out one more thing. It's kind of interesting. Pictorial, if you go to the attachments in the very back, the ones that are folded, and you go to the very last one. This is the 93. This is the upgraded 93. This is what Edgemont looks like today. And you can see the impoundment and you can see the emergency spillway. And this was what was acceptable. This was approved by MDE in the 90s. This is what 90% of the PMP looked like. If you go to any of the other drawings, the third one is this one. This is what MDE wants us to construct. You compare the two drawings. This is what the spillway will look like. I kind of say from aerial, it's going to look like Jaws. It's so that you have the surface area going across the spillway sufficient enough to slow the velocity down and hold equivalent to 100% of the PMP. So you go from a nice, I'm going to say compact structure at 90% to this. So this is one of the things we're trying to get MDE to move on, saying, you know, let's fix what we have, even if we need to rebuild what we have because of the seepage underneath. The work that's required, just the concrete work alone is massive. All of these, and when you look at the tightness of these, it's called a labyrinth. If you look at the tightness of that, I personally question the constructability of it because of how tight those, the labyrinth is. And then you can also see how, you can see the existing spillway in here, so you can see how much more, more land that it takes up. So, I mean, it's considerably so. And you guys were in the spillway, so when you think about the vegetation on either side and the base of that spillway, this is this is a huge, huge structure. So I put them in there as a visual for you, so you can kind of get a feel for what MDE's thought process is on the 100% PMP. In conversation with Hazen and Sawyer over the last couple of weeks, that design is, if MDE, the final report, which Hazen has worked with MDE on for their tool, is not significantly different from Virginia or from Pennsylvania. So Hazen doesn't expect that MDE is going to be anxious to move off of that design. However, we still want to have that conversation with them because it's millions of dollars. You know, it's not a little thing. It's millions. And for me, it's especially hard because we started out with a project that was between 2 and 3 million, and now we're looking at 30 plus million, 30 give or take million is what we've set it at. Once we have MDE's blessing to on the PMP, we can finish the design, we can put it out the bid, and we can move forward with the construction. Once we have their blessing on it and we have the design moving, we will then move forward with the Berkner plant. But part of knowing what to do with the Berkner plant, is it going to be a 0.7 MGD plant, or is it going to be a 2.75 average day with a 4.8? Very, very different design when you look at those two variables. It is our intent to submit funding applications for Berkner either in January of 2026, if we're there, and if not, it would be the following January. I expect this construction will take, I'm going to guess at least between 1 and 2 years, just because of the massive amount of concrete work that has to be done, and then all of the environmental hurdles that we'll have to work through as far as stream water, even the dredging of the reservoir and possibly relining a clay liner in the reservoir and that sort of thing. So I expect that 2 years would not be unrealistic. So that's what I have on Edgemont. Happy to answer any questions you have. I did try to provide you with some history so that you could kind of wrap your arms around it and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. Any questions? The only thing, I guess, is it's my assumption, I just want to confirm that it's, we'll go ahead and bring Hazen, set up I'm going to say a kickoff meeting to resurrect the conversations, the design, and reestablish the dialogue with MDE, if that's what this body would like us to go ahead and move forward with.
With the MDE design?
Well, I don't know, we have to reinitiate those conversations. Whatever MDE, wherever they land, I will bring that back.
How long has it been?
They put us on hold in 2019.
Right.
They just now completed their study. It's in final draft, and I don't know their implementation date, but I would expect that it's going to be very soon. To our advantage, they asked Hazen and Sawyer to be on the team with the state, so we have an inside line with Hazen and Sawyer on that. But conversations with Hazen and Sawyer, I think it's going to take some convincing on behalf of the city and Hazen and Sawyer to, I would like to hold to the 90% PMP, and then do whatever we have to do to hold on to that. I don't know, or find some middle ground where it's not as extensive. To me, where we don't get into, I would really like to avoid constructability issues. We can design anything on paper, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can build it. So once we have that with MDE, our very first thing would be dialogue with MDE. And that includes fisheries, it includes appropriations, and it includes dam safety. It's all three groups, because they all play a role in this. I know this sounds a little odd, but one of the problems with the request from the DNR, there's no electric up at the reservoir. So when you start have to put in flow meters and screens where you have to, the screens have to, they have to auto clean so they don't plug up with leaves and stuff. One of the very first things you have to do is establish and get enough power up there to just power these things. And that's all centered around DNR fisheries. So there's still lots of obstacles, but if everybody's on board, we'll set up, we'll get those meetings established with MDE, and we'll bring back information as we have it. And then we can make decisions based on what MDE is essentially indicating that, what their expectations are. Any questions?
I think for me, when you look back through the record of information, a couple of things stand out. The first is government, when it wants to, can accomplish any engineering feat it sets its mind to. And if you just start in 2006 and work your way from 2006, there's small seepage at the base of the dam that's been there 120 years, and we need to address that item, right? We've addressed it in the 60s, we addressed it in the 90s. It's a dam, it requires maintenance over time, you drain it out, you do the maintenance, and it exists another 100 years. I mean, if you go up there, it is a pretty amazing structure to think that it was built in 1902 and that it has been a stable, clean water source for the city for 100 years. And we maintained it properly for 100 years. And the spillway has worked for 100 years, for 100 years worth of probable precipitation flow, right? But here's the reality. You read between the lines from day one of Fix the Seepage till day 2019 of your $2 million project became a $42 million project. And the reality is the state doesn't want us to do it. I mean, it's just that simple. There's no other conclusion you can reach than if you look at it and go, okay, we will do steps A, B, and C. And they say, hey, we'd like you to consider, and you can read the language yourself. It's very clear in here. It says, we'd like you to consider, give us a cost probability of decommissioning of the dam. You wouldn't ask for that as a state agency if you didn't want that to be the option on the table. you wouldn't ask for an analysis of flow-by for your spillway, right? And make it 4 times the size it is now, because that's a huge part of the construction cost. That's probably the bulk of the construction cost. Because then you know, with the constraints of the land, that people a lot smarter than them decided to put the dam at 100 years ago, located at, you know that that's a constraint that is affordably difficult to overcome. You wouldn't set the constraints on the capture rate of the side stream to the point where you can't even really collect any water if you didn't want the project to not happen. And I would be much better off if they would have just said out of the gate, listen, we're the appropriation entity, we're the authority, we're not going to approve this. But they haven't. They've said, hey, do step A, B, and C. And we said, okay, we'll do those. Okay, but we'd like to add step D, E, and F. Okay, we've done those. Now we're going to add steps G, H, and I. And we went from sort of 3 fairly simple steps of maintenance of an infrastructure to bureaucratic opposition to allowing a jurisdiction to maintain, and again, I could be totally wrong here, a vital water storage resource. And that to me, I think is just the part that I can't get past, is that we have water storage resources for just about every large water system across the state of Maryland. And they want to decommission the one here because they want a stream, which is a very small stream to begin with, to simply flow through an area that it hasn't flowed through in 120 years. That's what they want.
With an endangered species.
Right.
It has a dart, it's a little fish, it's endangered.
But
I would
we-
add to that,
We can accommodate those items. But it isn't about that. A state agency simply wants to move the ball continuously until we simply say no. And it's really hard for me to sit here and say no when I know that our utility provides water to 80,000 customers, and it has to do that by producing and distributing water every day, meaning every day we produce the same amount that we send out for people to use. And we have absolutely zero storage capacity in our system. Because you can look at the towers, but once the towers get below that 60% level, there ain't enough pressure to get it out to zone 6 on the east end of the town. What happens to be out at zone 6 on the east end of town is a 120-year-old storage facility that you really don't have to pay a whole lot to collect, treat, and distribute into the system, right? Because it doesn't have the same issues pulling water out of the Potomac. It just doesn't.
yeah, it's different.
It is, and so I think that what I find odd is the fact that we are in conflict at times with developers and the business community and the county, right? And all those partners that want to make sure that the city water system continues to, keep on keeping on, right? But nobody wants to really sit down and evaluate and digest this information and then go to bat in any sort of collective way to a state agency that is simply going to dictate to the utility provider until we simply give up. And if we give up this resource, there isn't an easy answer for what that alternative is. And the alternative suggestion, and I get that it's an idea, and it may be a good idea, but the alternative suggestion that we're gonna be able to pull 5 million gallons of water out of the Antietam Creek on a daily basis doesn't seem reasonable to me, especially given that it clearly isn't as dependable and as clean a resource as the one that folks a lot smarter than us built and put in place to ensure this resource would be available 120 years ago. It seems so odd to me.
One of the, I guess there's two things that are worth mentioning from a staff perspective. One of them is that the existing emergency spillway, OG and OG, was designed using the PMP model that was in place when we started in 2016 and 2017, okay? So that exact same model that was used in 93 and accepted at the 90th percentile was the same model that we ran, because the state hadn't updated it, so that's a little bit frustrating for me. But the other thing that I think is that this body needs to be aware of or reminded of is empty or full, it is a high hazard dam. If we have a flooding event in the watershed and anything, we still have to operate that dam. If that dam fails, my question to the state is we've been maintaining it dry. What is the condition of the clay liner at this point? What is our risk of failure? Because it's still a high hazard dam. So if we can't get anything approved and we say, okay, we're done, we still have to decommission that dam and restore the watershed, which is going to, the prices we had in 2016 to 2019 was somewhere between 5 and 8 million, I believe. We still own a high hazard dam for as long as it's there, empty or full.
I think it's important for the public to hear. So, we get these reports and we read them and it says, okay, the spillway has potential compromise of seepage from the joints within the concrete structure, right? And we're talking about slabs that were built 100 years ago, right?
Well, these slabs are from 93.
Yeah,
They
the slabs-
rebuilt all that.
Yeah, but they have like a 1/4 inch offset between some of the seams. You're talking slabs half the size of this room that have, a slight 1/4 inch offset. You have to actually get down and feel the seam to see the offset that has happened, right, in 30 years. And I'm like, man, if that's the metric by which you judge the failure of that concrete construction, you should condemn every bridge across the state tomorrow. Because I just look at that structure and go, it just doesn't make any sense. And the notion of the redesign of the spillway with that jagged, I don't even understand that design, the labyrinth and the teeth. If your objective is to slow it, and you're worried about the warm water, here's a simple idea. You could put in baffles, right? And baffles are controlled, right? And they could pull, and you could keep the wall at 5 foot above elevation, right, where the spillway is. And you could open that baffle so many times a day, and you could pull that water through that it's a 5 foot depth and is colder than surface. And it would address, and it's like, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a water guy, and I can come up with something as simple and solvable as that. And if you're not looking at those things, and what that just simply tells me is you just don't want it to happen. And I'd rather the state agency just say, listen, we don't want you to do it. So that we at least then at that point know who we need to go to participate with us to go to bat for not folding on again what has been a stable source that we already have most of this stuff built to support the system that we have.
Well, what do you think makes this any different than any other reservoir in the state of Maryland?
To me, I think it's the degree to which you contest the issue. I do. I think it's the degree to which you wish to contest the issue. I can tell you right now, could be totally wrong, but I guarantee you, if the state were approaching the WSSC in this same
That's
manner
what-
with the same
yeah,
directive,
exactly.
there's no way. There's no way the WSSC would say, thank you, for your input. We need to work through this issue, and this is a necessary source for, 300,000 people.
I think one of the things is this, we're a victim of circumstance. Until you get a directive from the state that it's unsafe and unacceptable, and you have to do a project, you have to address it. One of the questions I've asked, and I don't have the answer to this question, it's not been provided to me, is every high hazard dam in Maryland is a PMP, is designed to 100% of the PMP. Are all of the dams, high hazard dams that are owned by the state of Maryland, constructed to the 100% of the PMP? And if not, when you're rehabbing them, is the state going to require the state to do those improvements to 100% of the PMP? For me, it's frustrating to have had a design approved in 1993 using the exact same tool with using 90% of the PMP and it be acceptable by the Dam Safety Division. But today, it's not acceptable.
When was the last time we had an honest conversation with MDE about this?
In 2019. They moved into their study phase.
Yeah.
Well, COVID hit. and
I remember
then-
that because Senator
Yep.
Quarterman, Delegate Quarterman, I think at
Yep.
the time, was set in on that one.
Yeah, we actually went to Baltimore and we sat in a lobby at MDE's offices, talking with the different folks. If you remember, at that time, we met, which included the secretary.
Yeah.
Because that was when the fisheries, DNR fisheries started putting a lot of limitations. We were already struggling with the PMP. So that's why my thought is have Hazen set up the meeting with 3 different agencies in the city and I'm going to say, reestablish a conversation and just, I'm going to say, get that starting point and then bring that back and ask some additional questions, bring that back and say, okay,
Maybe
this is where.
just get blunt with them. Just say, what's the deal?
Well, we've done that before and this is what we got. We have we have everybody sitting on something.
Well, but I think we need to
Yeah,
keep pressing it, like Councilman said.
yeah.
We're just kind of going, okay.
Well, we've been waiting on the PMP, so
Right.
we know that they're doing they have final draft and final review, so the timing is good to sit down, not just, like I said, dam safety is only one entity, we need to sit down with all
Right.
3 groups at the same time. It's sometimes hard to get all 3 groups in the same room at the same time, but we've done that a
Yeah,
couple times
yeah.
before, but that's really what we need to do, because we have 3 moving targets. So, and then.
Well, I think it's interesting, you read the report, you go back to 2016 where it talks about, high hazard, right?
Yeah.
And you drive up and you look at it and go, okay, this thing is like 100 feet wide at the base, right? It's probably 30 feet wide as you get towards the top. And what is the number? In other words, is it 5%? Is it 7? Is it 15? Is it 32? What is the percentage? I mean, there has to be an engineering level calculation of, what that means. And then you look at you look at the outfall side and you read, 77 properties that could be affected. Is that 38 properties that'll be 11 feet underwater in seconds, or is that, somebody that may get 6 inches of water through the front
Right.
yard? Like, It just, you read those and there's no tangibles assigned to what those general statements mean.
It's not gonna be the Johnstown flood.
But just you go up there and you're like, you got to drive pretty much to the middle of nowhere, except for the house that I believe we were in, to get
Correct.
Yeah,
to any house in the direct vicinity.
yeah. Fruit Tree Lane, I believe, is where the biggest impact would be, and of course, Route 66. But, and we actually, Tyler just completed, we have to update them every year, the EAPs, the emergency action plans. So we'll put them in shared folder for you, Scott,
Yep.
or Smithsburg, and we have to do them for the Smithsburg down at the Brickner plant as well as Edgemont.
Have they estimated what the average rate of flow of the seepage is when the dam's full?
Yeah, it'll be in one of those reports. They did. In fact, if we maintain the dam at, I think it's
70%,
well, 12 inches below
Right.
the emergency
Right.
spillway, there's no seepage at all.
yeah, because you don't have the appropriate pressure
Yeah,
Right.
to
Yep.
force that. So you fill it all the way up
yeah.
and you get like 10 gallons a minute,
And based
through the
on,
seepage area.
and it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I believe the seepage underneath the spillway is not impacted by the elevation of the water in the reservoir. The belief is that it's groundwater that is, of course, worked its way under the
Right.
over time. But, well, we'll get that meeting set up and we'll follow up. We'll let you know when the meeting is. We'll get the EAPs, put them on the H drive to Scott. And he'll get them to you so you can see what the inundation mapping looks like, and so you can see where those 77 properties are.
And again, I'm not against the Antietam idea, but somebody's got to tell me that water is healthy, right?
It's not like, it's not water like you get.
Well, yeah, it's got to be, healthy, it's got to
Yeah.
it's got to be reliable, it's got to cost less,
Yeah.
right? And, I think back to when we had to close the Potomac plant. Remember we had to close the plant, let the stuff go by. And the public, I don't think, just doesn't have an understanding that when we closed the plant down to let the stuff go by, right? It came from up at Cumberland area or something.
What's the paper mill?
Yeah.
The latex spill.
Yeah, we had to close the plant. We weren't allowed to take any water because we were afraid
Right.
of the issues. And for every hour we had to close that off was hour we weren't producing water, which we then had to make up because we only have 12 hours worth of water on hand
Right,
to deliver.
right.
And nobody seems like surprised or concerned
Well,
by that fact.
I refer to our intake on the Potomac. We're the Blue Canary on the Potomac. We are the first potable water intake on the Potomac. So anything that happens west, we get it first.
First ones to get.
We're number one. And so everybody else, West Virginia as well as Maryland, looks to us for, how you doing? So we're the blue canary. This will probably boggle your mind a little bit, but here before long, we'll be bringing a proposal of some sort. Don't know exactly what it's going to look like first, but the state also considers the berm around the Wilson plant a high hazard dam, and we have to remove all of the trees on the berm, which will be, I think, estimated at about $500,000 because they consider it a high hazard dam. Now, it keeps the water from flooding the plant.
Yeah, that's the point.
I know, but there's
That's just
not.
another
So that
thing they put
80,000
into
people
it.
have
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's no inundation
No.
area associated with something that doesn't hold water back. But dam safety is requiring that we remove all of the trees. And right now, we're estimating that to be about $500,000. In addition to that, of course, we have to work with the National Park Service, Department of Interior to get
Corps of
access and
Engineers.
permission, to be on the canal side of the berm to remove those trees. So you'll, high hazard, like I said, we have 3 high hazard dams. And like I said, you'll be seeing Wilson before long. So I'll get that meeting set up. If, anything at all comes to mind, just let us know. And we'll do our level best to work through it.
Let's get this rate study done. I don't need it. I just picked it up out of habit.
All right, yep, rate model update.
Rate model, okay. Ashley's gonna come up for this one because she'll be the one primarily working with, she'll be doing all of the data pulls and so forth with, for us to work with NewGen. So, the proposal is attached, but just a few highlights. First, just want to point out just a couple basic facts that, so on the city side, we have about 31,500 accounts and water accounts, and 45% of those accounts are inside municipal limits. 55% of those accounts are outside municipal limits. However, 35% of the the metered water goes to city residents and 65% goes to county residents on the water side. These are some of the things we look at when we do the rate model. On the wastewater side, we have just under 21,000 active accounts total, with about 13,700 of them being inside city limits and 7,200 being outside. So you have a 65-35 split, most of those accounts being inside the city. And the usage doesn't change a whole lot for the wastewater. So when we look at the rate model, that's kind of a big deal because on the wastewater side, we have to collect most of the revenue required to run the wastewater system from in-city customers, municipal residents. 35% comes from outside. So just, I'm going to say kind of I consider them to be interesting numbers, but right now, I pulled a report last week and we have approximately 900 accounts that are inactive. We're not delivering water to them and they're not discharging any wastewater to us. Some of the things that will drive this work, the things that we're looking at is, number one, first and foremost, is we need to collect the required revenue for operations and capital. And remember, debt service is part of our operational costs. We will consider all customer classes for water and wastewater to include both, the usage, for usage as well as benefit fees and for fire protection, fire line service. We'll want to make sure that however we move forward, that we do so in a way that our rate model is defendable. We'll look at population growth in the city. We'll look at population growth in the county and our non-city customers, and that'll be incorporated into the model. We look at consumption trends. We look at the trends for customers inside the municipal limits, customers outside the municipal limits, but we also look at consumption trends based on customer classification, residential versus commercial versus industrial versus even fire line and wholesale customers. So we look at those trends in a couple different ways. We will be looking to maintain a 6-month cash reserve so that if anything unexpected comes up, we have a reserve that we can count on. And we'll also be looking to be sure that our revenue is sufficient so that we have adequate money to take care of unplanned capital. And we call it our 3R, which is repair, rehab, and replace. So we try to move money from our kind of our operating cash into our capital cash so that we have funds set aside for those 3 Rs. Some of the alternatives that we discussed previously was, looking, the current design and the model, the way it exists today. We talked about average tiers. We talked about 1 tier. We'll look at more than that, but we will definitely be looking at those. We'll also be looking at, we'll look at, we evaluate the current model assumptions to make sure all of our assumptions are still reasonable, and to make sure that we're not missing anything, because this model was originally built and put in place in 2005. We'll review within this region. When I say this region, I mean anywhere from North Carolina up into the New England states. What are other people doing as far as rates, and have there been any challenges, and how did that work out? So we'll look at a fairly large regional. We're going to look at how we do fire line charges for compound meters. That is one of the number 1 complaints we get from our non-residential customers, paying a huge fixed fee and absolutely no water ever going through the large side of that meter. We'll be looking at irrigation meters and or sewer deduct meters. We will look at, we have to develop an inside joint wastewater rate for the Bostetter property. That was something that we identified in the amendment to the JSSA, part of our agreement with the county, because that wastewater flow will go to the county. Of course, I've already said we'll look at allocation fees. The other thing we want to look at is we want to be able to move all non-residential customers, especially those customers that have a fire line or a fire domestic meter, to monthly billing as opposed to just large water users. That'll allow us to be able to better manage that customer group. That would include residential multi. There's about 1,600 residential multi, and then it's commercial industrial that would be quarterly. Right now, we have about 360 fire domestic meters in our system. So there are things that we'll be looking at. And, it's on the consent agenda from NewGen, another copy of their proposal, as well as the price for the proposal to go ahead and get this work kicked in. One of the things, too, that was mentioned, you wanted to look at is if we were ready, and there was a desire to do so, could we amend the rates that were put in place for FY26? And the answer to that back then was yes. That's part of this study, to say, okay, if we're amending the model, or we're amending how we're going to calculate a bill, yes, we can revoke what was done and replace it with, and we can do that for just water, just sewer, or water and sewer together. So that is incorporated into this as well. So with that, is anything, any questions?
I know in the previous administration, we had many conversations about the water rates, and we all agreed the 2005 model is just 20 years old. So thank you for bringing it back on the agenda and pushing forward with getting a new look on our current rates, because I think this will be beneficial to at least get a more current grasp on our system. So.
Yeah, actually, your comment, I've used it with our contractor, Mike Maker, about how you said that you wanted to revamp the model. So we've been really talking, and even, I think the term blowing it up. And so I have used similar language with him so that he knows that we really do want to do what you say and really
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna take all of the Legos, we're gonna put them in a pile and put them back together. And we'll see how they shake out. And we will bring the different scenarios to you. So with, one of the things that I think is important to do is we can use the trends and say, okay, this is what it looks like on a trend. But what does it look like for this customer that uses this much water? And look at those different variables, kind of like we did in previous conversations. So we'll do that and bring it back to you. And it may be, and we'll be bringing it back to you in draft format, probably before we get to a final draft, likely before we get to a final draft, just to bounce those ideas off of you, to say, hey, do you like this? Or what don't you like about it? So we can go back and make those changes and incorporate those ideas.
Thank you in advance for pulling the data.
Oh, sure, no, I
Sure,
always,
it's gonna be some fun.
oh, I have a pretty large Dropbox file, so thank you.
All right.
I want you two to just stay here and just go over the state revolving fund for Maryland Department of Environment.
Okay.
Please.
This is just for information only. And these are the funding applications we've submitted. Things that I guess I would note is that on the R.C. Wilson Transmission Main Project, we are asked for this phase was 15, in loan was 15 million with 2.25 million in local share, our cash. MDE, we currently have, MDE is currently approved, has setting aside for us $5 million for this project. We will be going back to MDE for the subsequent phases once this one starts to move. The lead and copper roll, that's brand new. If we do not get this funding, this work cannot move forward. As you know, this would completely deplete our cash, just this project alone without this funding. That being said, we have to figure out how it is we're going to comply with the lead and copper rule. Because there's a requirement that we evaluate the service line, the private service line, the service line that is owned by the customer, not the city. As you well know, we have no jurisdiction beyond the meter, so we have no right of entry. We can't, so we have to have a contractor, and the contractor has to work with each of the customers. We have to make, I think, is it 2 or 4 attempts? Numerous attempts with the customer to be able to look at the private side. That's the bulk of this, to be able to evaluate the private side. So, without this funding, we can't move forward with that. We're hoping that the federal and state government realize the error of their ways, that they can't hold a government water supplier liable for a private water line, but we don't know, who knows what's going to happen there. For us, it's between 17,000 and 18,000 services that we have to investigate out of 31,000 services that we have. So it's a big number. So that's new. The Edgemont Reservoir's in there. A previous funding application was $20,250,000. Requested $30 million in loan this time with a local share of $4.1 million. Taken into consideration, we've already approved and have spent over $1 million. I don't know what that local share is going to end up being. It'll depend on where we land. Wastewater Pump Station 13, that project will move forward independent of this funding application. We did put one in several years ago, but we withdrew it, not knowing exactly what we would be doing with ARPA money. We used 100% of the ARPA on Pump Station 33. So the local money that we would have used on Pump Station 33 is available for this work, but we still put a funding application in. The state, MDE, the funding folks ask us to break the wastewater treatment plant into 3 phases. That's why you see 3 phases this year. Last year, our application was $62 million, and it was looking pretty much at one phase. Phase 2A is additional work. So the total of the 3 funding applications is just under 70.3 million. And so all 3 of those are in with MDE at their request, to put 3 of them in as opposed to resubmitting an amended $62 million one project. They wanted, MDE's already approved 20 million on the phase 1 of this project. We did request an additional 2 million just on phase 1. So in a nutshell, that's where we're at. If MDE, if we get ranked and rated favorably, of course, we'll bring that back because that requires your approval before we can tell MDE, yes, that we want this money. So I didn't include the entire funding application in here for each of the projects, but.
You can if you'd like. You want to read it?
I did include the project summary and the financials, just so you kind of had an idea of what was submitted. Package was much bigger than that, but I didn't want to, I was trying to save the future. I can put them on, if you desire, I can put them on the H drive and you can read them. If you're having problems with insomnia, you can read them.
Maybe Councilman, I'm sure.
I think there's 2 comments on the lead and copper roll application. One is, and these are probably both for the public's awareness. So the first is, it's interesting that the lead and copper roll program really doesn't have a lot to do with lead and copper, right?
Galvanized.
What they're looking for is galvanized. But they say it's the lead and copper roll, right, program that's looking for galvanized pipe.
Yep.
So that's the first odd thing. And the second is, we had to send out a letter, meaning every utility across the land, that was poorly written by somebody sitting behind a desk, that was meant to
created a ton of
scare
phone calls.
everybody, right, into responding.
Yep.
It made no sense.
For Tyler.
Made no sense. You know, and I can't imagine dealing with 17, because in my jurisdiction that I work for, you know, we dealt with like 30. So,
Yeah.
but here's the reality, and I think this for the public's benefit. If you got one of those letters, it really has nothing to do with lead or copper. All they want to know is what's coming through the wall in your basement. It's not saying that the city's delivering, you know, lead infused water into the system. Here's the reality. Half of these properties in this city are probably fitted with copper piping that is fused with lead joints and things like that. So you're going to find some amount in a lot of homes that exist, especially the older homes. So it's really, when you get the letter, all the city wants to know is go down, look at the pipe coming in through the wall, right? And if it's copper, you should be able to tell it's copper. And if it's really soft, you know, it might be lead, but we don't have lead tests anywhere in the city to indicate that.
Do not.
We've yet to find a service line of that nature. And if it's galvanized, you'll be able to tell it's a different type of metal, and you may or may not have to do anything about it. Because what I think they're really looking at is the meter vault to that pigtail, right? And not knowing what the little bit of line is from there into the house.
Right.
Could be. But if it's coming through the wall and it's not lead, there's a pretty good chance when it gets to the curb stop, the meter vault, that it's still galvanized or copper as well.
And when you do that, please go online and complete the survey.
Yeah.
So we don't have to invest ratepayer dollars and paying a consulting, an engineering firm to come out and determine that for us, because.
And that's all you need to do. Like, we're not going to be knocking on doors, even though the letter written by the federal government basically says, you know, we're going to be telling you you've got to replace your service line.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have that authority to dictate to private property owners a requirement to replace their private water line.
We do not. We, per city code, and this is true of most jurisdictions, all of our meters are outside of the curb. And our right of entry stops at the meter. And so in Pennsylvania, most of the meters are inside. So they have a whole different can of worms than what we have. But ours is at the curb. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's looking for galvanized. And if there's no lead lines, which we've never found any, upstream of your service, the required action is no action required. In Councilman Ilshire will remember this. When we did the last upgrade at the Wilson plant, it was a $12 million chemical upgrade. Part of that upgrade was to to feed an inhibitor. We feed polyorthophosphate. Think of Desitin. It, when you use it on your baby, it lines the inside, it coats the inside of the pipe so that in the event that inside of the pipe, as well as it protects your fixtures inside your house, because if you have old fixtures predating the lead ban, your bathroom faucet, your kitchen faucet could be a potential problem. But the city feeds polyorthophosphate to prevent to minimize or prevent exposure. The other thing that we do is we manage pH. So the pH of the water leaving the system is alkaline. It's 8.2, sometimes a little higher, but we're required to do that because of the previous versions of the lead and copper rule, so that we would not find ourselves in non-compliance. And to date, when we do our lead and copper system sampling, we are always below the action levels. So we've already spent millions of dollars on improvements at the Wilson plant to comply with the lead and copper rule that was in place at that time. So this is like the third or fourth version of this rule. And we get no credit for what it's worth. We get no credit for that. So, yes. As always, if any questions pop up, just let us know. We'll do our best.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, City Administrator.
Next week will be the first week that a HIAC student will be sitting in on the regular meeting with the council. They have appointed a council rep. We have also had HIAC members sit in on Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals. So it's nice we're getting those students involved. They'll sit down here with me at the table, and so we won't have to make room up there for them and give them an opportunity to make comment, tell them what the HIAC is doing. And then also, I'm sure you all talked about it, but today was pretty cool to finally get to cut the ribbon on the field house. And one person that was not mentioned, who was one of the original bunch of us that got together and talked about this, was Sheldon Sheeler. He with Coach Alshire and Kristen and Rodney Tissue, who I wish could have been there today. I hope Sheldon gets a chance to come and visit the field house too, because he was a major part of the initial discussions on all that. So it was a good day, and I'll be there in about 45 minutes.
She local, the guy.
Sheldon Myers, yeah, he was a Myersville councilman. Used to be a newspaper reporter, sports reporter.
He did high school sports and photography.
Yep.
And he does a lot of stuff, Mount St. Mary's and
Yeah.
a number of sports syndicates across the nation. And he was one of the operators that helped manage the Frederick Indoor Sports Facility. So he was a good resource to lean on of
Yeah.
sort of, which direction to go and what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. That's all for me, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilman Flaherty.
I have no.
Councilwoman Bell.
Yes, so the field house was definitely amazing today. I'm so glad I was able to be there and witness it. So also what I'm going to talk about is kind of like a play on that. So as we continue to recognize Black History Month, I wanted to take a moment to highlight the significance of sports and shaping and empowering our youth. Sports are more than just a game. They teach discipline, teamwork, leadership, and resilience. They provide opportunities for our young people to develop confidence, stay engaged, and work towards goals. I want to give a special shout out to two incredible athletes that were born and raised in Hagerstown. Rodney Monroe, and my cousin Dennis Scott. I'm pretty sure you know these athletes. Rodney played for the Atlanta Hawks, and Dennis played for Orlando Magic. Both of these men have made impact on the game, showcasing their talent and their dedication, and inspiring young athletes in the community. Their success is a reminder that greatness can come from right here in Hagerstown. I wanted to just give a shout out to them. Thank you for what they've done and being examples of excellence. Let's continue to support and uplift sports programs for our youth, ensuring that they have access to opportunity that can shape their future. Black History Month should not be limited to remembering, it should be inspiring action. Let's commit to preserving and amplifying these stories, ensuring that Hagerstown's Black history is not just acknowledged, but actively integrated into our city's future. Also, I just wanted to mention a couple other well-known basketball players in our town. Kenyatta Mason, Tony Ware, Avery Carey, Boo Lane, Tia Ferguson, DeJorman Harris, Devin Carey, Helen Mincy, Ebony Williams, and Bella and Rade Ray.
That's on North High?
No, they're not.
Can we mention
They're
like
not.
James Frisbee and some others from?
David Minor?
I'm just asking.
I had to just let it roll on, but I also wanted to remember
Patrice
all of them. Oh my goodness.
I knew that was gonna happen.
But I wanted to, I couldn't remember your exact quote today about just being in the room. If you could say that one more time again, because I was just like, what? I couldn't remember it. If you're in the room, you're meant to be in the room, or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
If you're-
like,
yeah.
yes, I found that very encouraging, and I
Absolutely.
really wanted to say that again and remind our youth, if you're in that room, you are meant to be in that room. If we are in this room, we are meant to be in this room, and I just wanted to thank you for saying that today as well. Bella and Rade Ray.
I know that's right.
If I don't mention anybody else, I'm gonna mention my
I have my
girl.
list of South High next time.
These are not north. This is Goretti, there's some Goretti, there is some south. DeJorman Harris is south.
There you go.
Yeah, I said him. Sylvia Parson, I don't know where she went to high, but you know,
North High.
okay.
Sorry, we'll get equal, we'll get equal time.
Yeah.
That's it for me, yep.
Councilman Alshire.
Yeah, it was a good event today. I certainly appreciated being a part of it and being able to participate in the facility. What I said simply is a regurgitation of a quote from our governor and tried to, apply it to all of the kids that I hope will find their way to the field house and participate in its activities, is that you will never be on a field or court in the field house that you don't belong. So I think basically it is meant for every kid in the community that wants that opportunity to participate in the good things that sports provide for a kid's upbringing.
Councilwoman Burnett.
So congratulations, Hagerstown, for Fieldhouse. And shout out to Councilman Alshire for actually accepting to be loved on and recognized, because I know that you do not like that. So I was kind of teary-eyed seeing you up there speak, because I know you don't like the spotlight. So I'm glad you had the opportunity to share your sentiments about how your vision started, and gave shout outs to city staff and Eastern Sports Management and all those before us to make this possible. Another entity for the youth, another entity for Hagerstown. So huge congrats. And you know what, Councilwoman Bell, I'm going to speak about my sister. The first time we did this, we spoke about our grandmothers, and we did not know.
Did not know.
And again, we didn't know that. I didn't know you was going to speak about sports. So this is crazy. Our mind is like connecting or something. So for my Black History Month spotlight, Eb Williams, my sister, the founder and owner of Eb Williams Basketball Player Development, has been a transformative voice in Hagerstown, Maryland, since establishing her company in 2017. After excelling as Division I athlete and playing professionally overseas, Ebony returned home with a mission to develop young players and share her knowledge and experience with those aspiring to follow in her footsteps. Ebony's impact on the community is extraordinary. As the first Black woman to own a basketball training company in Hagerstown and the first to establish basketball training program in the area, she has built the longest-running training company, coaching over 400 students annually. Her commitment to excellence has led her students to secure over $20 million in scholarship funding. And one of her students has even competed in 2024 Paris Olympics. In addition to her work in player development, Ebony has been instrumental in community improvement. She spearheaded the revitalization of the basketball courts at Wheaton Park and has served as the commissioner of the Ruth Ann Monroe Summer Basketball League since 2019, giving over 200 kids the opportunity to play competitive basketball for free each year. A Hagerstown Hot List 2023 finalist for Best Trainer, and also just nominated for 2025's Hot List, and voted Hagerstown Hometown Hero. Eb Williams continues to break barriers and inspire young athletes to achieve greatness both on and off the court. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but you guys are bringing stuff up. So Councilwoman Bell, you mentioned Rodney Monroe. I had the opportunity to play against him, and he's probably, I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I think he was one of the best basketball players ever come out of this
Yeah,
area.
no doubt.
Yeah, so they kicked her butt a good many times, but, at least I got to play against them. Second, I don't think we're talking about the field house. I don't think the gymnasium on the second floor is getting enough love. How many people did they say that are members there now?
130 some, I think,
126.
126.
126. I encourage everybody to go take a look. I joined there, and that place is
State of the art.
It's amazing, state of the art. Yeah, all the machines are so much easier than what I used to be doing. So, and that's it for me. I'll need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I guess second. Any questions about anything tonight? Okay, no, we're adjourned.